I'm Deanna.
And I'm Grace.
And this is The Flow Up, a podcast about deconstructing, dissecting, and disentangling reality from myth for all things health and wellness.
Let's get into diets, diet culture, where it infiltrates our lives, where it hides and lurks, sneaky and skillful. We'll talk about that voice inside all of our heads, the one that screams at you, or whispers, or insults you when it comes to food, choices, and our bodies.
We'll talk about our friend, the mirror, and the scale. We'll dive into our own experiences, talk about our own histories, and discuss how we navigate the toxic messages that are hurled at us daily from the media, our loved ones, strangers, and subtly in what we buy, where we travel, and what we watch.
Before we get into this episode, we do want to mention that, we are both not living in larger bodies. So there is a little bit of privilege in that. And we just want to make everyone aware that while we experience diet culture, as everyone experiences diet culture, we are experiencing it at a different level than those that live in larger bodies. So we do want to call out our privilege when talking about this topic.
Okay. Diet culture.
Yes, I'm so excited for this topic. We have a lot to talk about.
We do.
It's very exciting. I think the biggest thing with social media now is maybe it's just who I follow or what I hear or see, but I feel like diet culture has become kind of a buzz phrase, right?
Mm-hmm.
We kind of see it everywhere. We kind of hear it everywhere. And I remember thinking to myself, okay, what exactly is it?
Yeah.
So I think, how we can start is we can just kind of break down what is diet culture, and kind of go from there. So, we both did some research into defining diet culture, and the definitions are all pretty aligned. Basically, diet culture refers to a set of beliefs that value thinness, appearance, and shape above health and well-being. Additionally, the concept places importance on restricted calories, normalizes negative self-talk, and labels certain foods as good and bad. Individuals subjected to diet culture messaging have been conditioned to believe that not only does thinness and dieting equate to health, but that the pursuit of health makes one person morally superior than the other person. It's a glorification of losing weight at all costs.
Mm-hmm. Oof. Gosh, there's so much to unpack in that one paragraph alone. I think, something that's a core tenet of diet culture is the fact that this is a system. It's called culture for a reason. It infiltrates our society. It's a system of beliefs that, a huge proportion of our population holds in the United States here where we are. It's a system that of beliefs that equates thinness to this issue of equating thinness or smaller size to health and moral virtue, and that promotes weight loss as a means of attaining a higher status or an elevated status in society, and that demonizes certain ways of eating and elevates other ways of eating. That's a lot right there.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, it's hard almost to, because we all have, like you said, we all have our preconceived sort of ideas of what diet culture is, and we throw that term around a lot. You hear it a lot, but this is there's a lot to it.
Mm-hmm. And something interesting about diet culture is that it completely looks at people as if there is no one body type is good, one body type is bad. And diet culture really conflates size and health. So if you are in a thinner body, that automatically means that you are healthier and better than those that are in larger bodies, which, looking at research, is not the case. That's not how health works. For a variety of reasons, people live in larger bodies. People in thin bodies are not necessarily very healthy either. It really ties your worth to your body size or your shape.
And I think when that becomes internal, we can internalize that. We do internalize that, and it becomes sort of this system of like self-perpetuating oppression. And it's a vicious cycle, and it gets, we get fed, and that cycle, it's sort of, we get that feedback from the messages we're seeing, from the ads that we are viewing on TV, and the people that we're talking to, and the people we follow on social channels. And I think a lot of what all of this can come together to sort of lead to is a lot of stigma around weight, around size, around body shape, right? Because it's size and shape. And, I think we can, like you sort of suggested, Grace, there's a lot of nuance to health. And by simply looking at somebody and looking at the size and shape of their body, we cannot make any assumptions about their physical, mental, emotional, spiritual health, like whatever. We can't make any assumptions about them because, as you said, again, there are a number of reasons why body sizes and shapes vary. And some of these things are in our control, and some of these things are outside of our control. And, there's a lot going on there. And the problem with, making assumptions about bigger body sizes and shapes is that this can lead to pathologizing those bigger body sizes, because we assume that, that must mean that this person has something within their control that they're not doing that's causing this, and therefore they're unhealthy, because that's what we've been led to believe basically from the time we were elementary school kids.
Well, and we talk about social media because obviously social media is a big part of our life today, but diet culture and sizeism, as it were, can be seen everywhere. I mean, going to the doctor's office, I've read reports from people that live in larger bodies, basically saying they'll go to the doctor for an inner ear issue, and the doctor will be like, oh, it's because you're fat. Like,
oh my gosh,
these types of things, a focus on the body mass index, which we will get into at another time, but is total bullshit, to excuse my language, is not an indicator of health in any way. And, other examples, certain, people in larger bodies are expected to shop at specific stores. They can't go everywhere because certain places will be like, well, we only carry up to this size, not very size inclusive, if you will. And, this does really connect to pivoting a little, like food rules and restriction, because our society values thinness. And so you want to be thin, right? So a common way to do that is by controlling your food and exercise, and that leads to restriction and really ultimately unhealthy behaviors. I mean, diet culture supports strict rules and adherence to often nebulous rules, labeling certain foods as good or bad based on something that honestly is kind of unclear. I mean, what really makes a food good or bad?
Yeah, I'm a strong believer in there is no inherently good or inherently bad food out there. Like you cannot, it's just an unhealthy way, I think, to view food in general, and can lead to some really not very adaptive behaviors over the long term. But I think like we have this obsession in the West, and I don't know, it might not just be us, but I feel like we are totally obsessed with labels and rules and regulations and buckets and categories. And we just want to like throw people into categories. We want to label people. We want to like, we're very rule abiding, and we place a lot of value in that, right? So like in kindergarten, we used to get gold stars for like following all the, whatever's the rules we had to follow the first time through, or lining up appropriately, or, and maybe there's some room for that there. But when it comes to, I can only eat these 3 items today, or I can only, consume liquids for the next 7 or 10 or 15 or 20 days. It's like, why? Like it just seems very sticky to me. And I would suggest and encourage a healthy amount of skepticism when it comes to, if you're looking to lose weight or do whatever it is, when it comes to that, incorporates restricting food in some way. Like, first of all, the word restricting like already makes me cringe. But if you're going to be cutting out certain things, again, we're not going to get into like people who have medical issues that require,
Right.
certain foods to be restricted. But I would say exercise a healthy amount of skepticism when it comes to like, you can't have this and you can have that. Like yes and no foods, like good, bad. Like it's just 2 categories, 2, black, white issue thing. That's not, I don't see this as a black, white issue. And I think that's something that we need to work through a little bit more deeply.
So really quickly, can you kind of walk through like why the word restricting like kind of makes you uncomfortable? Because I feel like it's commonly used, and so it's like I'm curious on your thoughts on that.
So restricting is a loaded word for me for a number of reasons. First of all, I think restricting sounds like constricting, and it sounds to me like you're getting suffocated by an anaconda. Like that's, first of all, like that's just my visceral reaction to the word.
Sure.
So I'm sure someone out there agrees. But and we'll get into this a lot deeper, but I have history with an eating disorder, anorexia. And one of the hallmarks of anorexia the hallmark symptoms is intense food restriction. And so, and this was years ago, but it's something that will always be in my brain. And going through treatment and working with a dietitian and working with a therapist over the long term, it became incredibly clear that restriction is the antithesis of health for me. And so that's something I carried through and believe and value, as, I now value that, like, this sort of non-restrictive attitude, because that is how I attained health again. And I just, this whole experience fundamentally changed my entire relationship with food, the way I viewed certain foods, because before the eating disorder, and what led to the eating disorder, really, it was very much this labeling of good and bad foods, which is why I feel that's so problematic. And this intense rule-based restriction of food and activity, also physical activity. And so it's kind of the same reaction to the word restriction that I get when I hear people say something like, I'm going to go burn this donut off and run a couple miles. Like, good, help me. Yep, that's my relationship with the word restriction.
No, I mean, I think that makes sense. And, I think it's interesting that we should always be aware of the language that we are using. And I feel like when we talk about diet culture, it is, or talking about being anti-diet culture, it is very much like, don't restrict, don't restrict, don't restrict. But I think, a lot of people may not realize that word may be triggering to a lot of people. So that's really, an interesting perspective on that. Yeah. But I think, oh, no, go ahead.
I was going to say, I'd love to know what others think about that. If anyone's listening and feels one way or the other, if you disagree with me, please tell me. Write to us, and we'll drop our email in our show notes, but we'd love to hear from you.
Yeah. So, now that we've kind of defined diet culture, and we have kind of, everyone listening, we kind of have a basis, and we're all operating off of the same definition, right? We're going to kind of go into how we see diet culture today. And because I think that ultimately diet culture as a foundation is the same. It has the same message, it has the same end goal, right? But how the messages are getting to us are different. So like, I, as you were talking, it reminded me of that Kate Moss quote where she says, "Nothing tastes as good as skinny feels." Do you remember that?
Oh, yeah.
And like, in thinking back to growing up, like I think it was Abercrombie, they were like, we only carry like maybe a large or an extra large, and that's the largest size that we will carry.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like growing up, the messages were very, very clear. Like there was no getting around. Like this is clear. We clearly prefer thin and skinny bodies here. Um, but it feels like now, maybe this is just my own opinion, but like with social media, the messaging doesn't feel as overt, but we're being bombarded with it almost more often than before. Because I mean, like you think about the models that were popular when we were growing up. I mean, they all had the same body type, right? They were all the same size, probably a size 0, which is not a size because that doesn't make any sense. But now we're seeing influencers that have different body types, but still kind of fit in a very specific box. I'm thinking of the Kardashians, obviously, like their bodies sure have more, like there's more meat on their bones, excuse that kind of phrasing, but like
curves.
Yes, but like it's still, the curves are in the right places, and it's considered, it's sexualized, and like so yeah, I think certain messaging about diet culture has changed, but the ultimate like foundation is still the same.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think I can very vividly remember like walking into Hollister, Abercrombie, like American Eagle, whatever stores, the 3 big ones I shopped at, and feeling so much success and like this queen of the world, whatever, wet persona when I was able to fit into like a size 0 or like, oh my gosh,
Yes.
and I was like, I mean, I felt literally that was the best feeling ever. And the fact that, there was a very clear it was socially acceptable for these stores to carry only size 0 to size whatever 8, 10, however much they went, maybe not even into the double digits, but now, and I agree with you. I think we are being constantly bombarded in more subtle ways, whether we're scrolling through feeds on social channels or watching TV, or even like the type of rhetoric we hear, whether it's on the radio or podcasts or in modern TV shows, whatever that is for you. I'm sure it's there. It's probably not completely absent, and it's even more societally like the norm and acceptable for this type of rhetoric and dialogue to be elevated and to be allowed. I think you're not going to get a huge pushback from your audience. Maybe there will be a small subset of people who are going to push back on any type of messaging that supports or promotes or elevates diet culture in some way, or glorifies skinniness, thinness, whatever, and ties body size to worth. But generally, I feel like it's totally acceptable for the most part. Like, why is that acceptable? And I don't know. I don't know the answer.
My theory is that because we have made this a moral issue, it then becomes very easy to demonize others, right? Like,
Yeah.
I am skinny, therefore I am healthy, therefore I am good. And you hear this rhetoric, you hear this rhetoric all the time when people talk about those in larger bodies. It's, well, they're in a larger body, which means that they are unhealthy, which means that they are bad and lazy and
Mm-hmm.
all of these things, when in reality, as we've spoken about, you can't tell those things by looking at somebody. And so I think by making um, our bodies and the way our bodies look a moral issue, we are, as a society, allowed to continue to judge other people.
Mm,
Because obviously, like, you want to see yourself as the good person, right? So it's like, oh, what
yeah.
I'm doing is right. If I'm skinny, I am good. When in reality, you may not do anything to make yourself in thinner. You
Yeah.
may just, because of genetics, may just be thinner.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and and I think tying into this is like fat phobia. Like fat phobia
Yeah.
is so ingrained in our the way that we talk about people. I mean, and also think about the way that we grew up, right? Like um, until the 90s, Weight Watchers was really the only program that
Yep.
was out there. And then the 90s hit and it was like Jenny Craig and Slim Fast. Like it all, a bunch of companies like started on this diet culture train.
Yeah.
Um, and I think that kind of, it has that impact as well. Like it was kind of like all at the same time. We're all always seeing these messages all the time.
Yeah.
P90X, my partner will do the workouts, but it's the things that they say in the video are so problematic. They're like, oh, well, after this workout, I'm going to have a low carb meal. And then it's like trying to sell you like protein shakes, like just that
Mm,
constant messaging. Yeah.
yeah. I think you hit on something right there, which is like it all comes back to money. Like we are in America. This is
Yeah.
a capitalist like nation. Um, they're trying to sell you stuff. Like
Yeah.
there are so many problematic diets that are highly dependent upon selling objects, whether it's food. I remember my
Mm-hmm.
dad was on Nutrisystem for a while.
Oh,
That literally
yes.
sells you all of your food.
Mm-hmm.
Like no
Mm-hmm.
need to go to the grocery store. Like it was
Right.
ridiculously expensive for whatever the early 2000s, whatever that was when he did
Yes.
it.
Mm-hmm.
And oh my gosh, like it just felt so astronaut, like NASA, like packets of I don't even know what powder going into, shaking up with water. Optifast was another one. All of these things are selling you food when in reality, if you talk to any dietitian, that is completely unnecessary.
Right.
I would presume, not speaking for all dietitians, but like I don't think any dietitian would support, you know, spending an exorbitant amount of money on powder that there's some substitute for that. Like I'm just going to go out on a limb and say it. Um but but yeah, making money selling us stuff that we probably really do not need is a big
Right.
part of all of this stuff.
And it lines the pockets of
Yeah.
quite a few people.
Yeah.
Um, and I mean, the CEO of Weight Watchers doesn't care if you lose weight. They care if you continue to purchase the membership. I mean, that's
Mhm.
really what it comes down to.
Mhm.
Um, and, even people, the social media people, the Kardashians, they came out with like shapewear or something. And,
Yeah.
and it's like, they don't like they don't care about you losing weight. They want you to buy their stuff.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so it's like, yeah. So, and I think something else, that is important to add to my theory is
Mhm.
that we like to think in absolutes, I think, as people. So it's very much like, okay, this, in thinking about food or in different body types, like, okay, this food is good. And it's like labeled in your brain, it is good, it is always going to be good. I should always eat it because it's good. There's
Mhm.
certain food, like we'll use McDonald's as an example. It's like everything at McDonald's is bad and it's going to do this to me. And like we like to think in very concrete ways. And so I feel like diet culture plays into that because it's like,
Mhm.
okay, all skinny people equals good people.
Mm.
All larger people equal bad people.
Mm-hmm.
All vegetables are good. All fast food is bad. Like in theory, people may argue like it makes life easier to navigate, but in reality, that's not really. I mean,
Yeah.
you have this, this negative way of thinking about not only others, but the food, but yourself and the food that you eat.
Mm-hmm.
Um, yeah. So yeah.
And what does that do to you, right? Like if what is the good in beating yourself up for eating the burger at McDonald's on your road trip? Like
Mm-hmm.
literally accomplishes nothing. There's no room there in that absolute thinking frame for context dependent, there's no wiggle room. And I feel like there needs to be because sometimes, and we don't even need to get in too deep into this in this episode, but like there are we call we know that there are food deserts. Like we know that
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
people have there are intense access issues to healthy, sustainable, to foods that provide, a complete nutrient profile, whatever, however you want to define healthy foods. um, and there's a ton of privilege that goes along with being able to label foods
Yes.
as good and bad
Mm-hmm.
and label, and be able to say, well, I can't, I'm not going to go to McDonald's because it's ultimately awful for my health. Whereas a mother, raising 6 kids is like, I
Yeah.
can't afford to feed my kids. Like,
Mm-hmm.
produce costs more than McDonald's like dinner
Yeah.
for us. Like there is no, that is a bigger, broader issue. But I
Yeah.
think we have to be really careful, like speaking in these absolute terms, because we are making intensely general assumptions about the entire, country. And we have so many variations and subpopulations and, context. So I think that's
Mm-hmm.
important to note too.
Yeah. And, before we kind of go into how we see a little bit more on the way that diet culture has kind of co opted the health and wellness movement, um, I just lost my train of thought. It'll come back to me. We'll come back
It'll
to it
come back to you. Let's jump
later.
into that.
Yes. So, something interesting when I was um, kind of researching for this topic, I Googled how to navigate diet culture.
Mm,
And the first websites that popped up is Goop and Noom and Weight Watchers.
mm-hmm.
And, um, I've heard apparently dietitians joke that Noom is like the Weight Watchers for millennials.
Oh my
But
gosh.
it's a weight loss program, but they try to make it seem like we're gonna help your relationship with food and like all this stuff. Goop, I don't think any needs any like preface. It's like
Mm-hmm.
very clear on what that is.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and another recent way that example of diet culture co-opting health and wellness is there's this big issue on social media where Gwyneth Paltrow, owner of Goop, uh,
Mm.
she didn't write the book, but she like supported this book written called Intuitive Fasting. Now, we didn't read the book because like we don't have time for that, that tomfoolery. We're not looking to have our brains rot from the inside, but um, the idea behind intuitive fasting is it's taking the concept of intuitive eating and applying it to intermittent fasting.
Mm.
So, and I tell you, like, when I saw that post, I went through and it's like, bunch of celebrities, bunch of famous people, like, yes, I bought this book already. Oh my gosh, it's gonna like change my life, all this stuff. And it's like, to those that don't have a trained eye to look at this stuff, that just may be seen as like, oh, intuitive fasting. Maybe they may not see it as like an anti-diet thing. They'll be like, oh, it's maybe a healthy thing to do.
The word
Yeah.
intuitive is key.
Yes.
It sounds
Yes.
so sexy. Like it's a great
Yes.
word, you know? So great marketing. I mean, good on her for the marketing.
Yeah.
Um, but wow, it makes me think of celery juice and
Oh my God. I I love talking about the guy that just made celery juice like the craze because it's just like the wildest thing ever. But
yeah.
yeah, I mean, yeah, it's it and it. diet culture co-opting health and wellness is not always as blatant.
Yep.
And I think, what I said about having a trained eye for this, like sometimes it's you really do have to have a trained eye for it because you may miss it and it may just kind of seep into your subconscious at
Mm-hmm.
that point. A personal example is, having celiac disease. I turned to when Facebook was like, okay to use. There are a lot of support groups. So basically, Facebook groups for people with celiac or who can't eat gluten and things like that. And at first, it was like, okay, helpful information. And then I noticed a lot of people talking about how they've gained weight since their diagnosis, which is very common. Um, because with celiac disease, before you're following a strict gluten-free diet, um, you're probably not absorbing a lot of nutrients.
Mm-hmm.
So odds are you're probably not gaining a lot of weight. And then following diagnosis, you follow that strict diet, and you may gain weight because your body is actually absorbing nutrients now. So a lot of people I started noticing, and I think because I was looking for it at this point, a lot of people were posting, how do I get rid of this excess weight? I'm going to do low carb. I'm going to do this type of diet. And a lot of people would comment and be like, I did the keto and I lost X amount of pounds. Oh, I'm trying this type of elimination diet. I'll lose all this weight. And it's just as simple as someone being like, yeah, I tried this diet and it worked for me. And it's a restrictive diet. I mean, that is diet culture.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah. And the thing is, this is a support group. It's supposed to be like a safe space, and I think that can be a place where people can run up against some trouble because there is no filter. There's no like, I mean, they're monitoring it, but they're not monitoring it in the right ways, in our opinions.
I have been
um,
kicked out of
yeah.
many support groups
Yeah.
because I have called this out and they don't like that.
Yep.
So,
So someone's monitoring it, but yeah, they're doing it for in different ways than we approve of.
yes, correct.
Um, yeah. Yeah. Okay. I think we're going to take a quick break, and be right back with some more on diet culture. Okay. We're back.
So, I have a question for you
Yeah.
as we go into our own experiences with diet culture. What is the cringiest or worst, maybe advice that you have seen? Maybe they didn't give it to you exactly, but you saw it like on social media. Like, what is the cringiest thing that you've seen someone say that relates to diet culture? Like,
Ooh. Ooh, that's a great question. I feel like I have to think really hard about it because I am very picky about who I follow on social media.
yes.
And if somebody posts something that I don't agree with, I kind of unfollow real fast.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
I don't, so this isn't like hugely cringy, but I don't like it. I don't love when people, and this can be incredibly damaging to people who have had previous eating disorders or disordered eating experiences and who are in recovery, but numbers can be intensely,
Mm,
I'll use the word triggering. Numbers can be intensely damaging, because whether you're talking about calories or you're talking about weight, I
mm,
think in best practice when working with people who you may or may not know have had past experiences with eating disorders or just disordered eating behaviors in general, and just I think as a good rule of thumb, why do we need to put numbers at all out there? But um,
yeah.
in most cases, when I see things like my 1200 calorie, pardon my language, my
Mm,
1200 calorie, a day diet plan for 7 days, like follow this, or
yeah.
my 1500 calorie eating plan for strength and stamina, or I went from 100 and blah blah to 100 and blah blah pounds in 2 weeks, that kind of stuff. I just want that gone from my memory and like from everybody else's, because luckily I feel at a place where I'm stable enough to resist that and to say like, oh yeah, that is so not cool, like not healthy, not down with that. But I worry, it makes me upset because I know that there are people out there that are filtering that in and letting it's not just washing over them, it's going deep inside. And that makes me really upset. Yeah.
Yeah. I think that's a great example. You know, I think social media is an interesting place. I was reading an article about diet culture, and they basically were saying that, you know, because of social media, anyone can be an expert. Anyone can act like they're an expert. And so if you see someone who maybe they post workout videos on their social media page, you know, and whether they actually have the credentials to or not, so we'll say like, yeah, you know, 1,300 calorie diet plan, right? Like, you don't know if they're a dietitian, a nutritionist, personal trainer. Like, you don't know their credentials to say that, but you may look at their page and be like, oh, well, they always post workout videos. They always post about quote unquote healthy things. So, and it worked for them. So, you know, maybe they know what they're talking about.
Right. And everybody reacts differently to foods and to exercise. Like, just because it worked for somebody, I feel like that really has no indication whatsoever for whether it's going to work for somebody else.
No.
But it's so easy to hold onto that and believe it. And I wonder, Grace, like with your experiences, I mean, in being part of either celiac support groups or just like on social media, what have you, I mean, that was a great example you noted before of someone saying like, hey, I went on keto and lost all this weight, like it worked for me, and someone else was like quick to jump onto it. But what other types of problematic things have you seen, whether related to celiac or just in general? Like, what makes you want to like hurl your phone across the room?
Yeah, a lot of it is related to losing weight. A lot, because as I mentioned, a lot of people with celiac may gain weight. And so, and you know, as we mentioned earlier, being in a bigger body means you're bad, right? When in reality, we're gaining weight because our bodies are getting healthier. And that seems to be a paradox for a lot of people because they've grown up not knowing that that's how that works. And so a lot of it is, oh, you know, I'm going to cut out carbs. I'm going to do keto, a very common diet for people with celiac and potentially other autoimmune disorders, is the low FODMAP diet. So it's essentially an elimination diet. And we don't have to get into the specifics now, but essentially an elimination diet. You are supposed to be on that you cut out all of these things to see if they're causing a variety of gastrointestinal issues. And then you are to reintroduce them after a couple of weeks. Unfortunately, a lot of people don't reintroduce, and so they continue on this very restrictive diet. Another issue is that the medical system likes this. I saw a gastroenterologist, and this was recommended to me. You know, and I talked to my dietitian about it, and she was like, yeah, the problem is that a lot of doctors aren't really taught about nutrition, so they don't really know anything about the low FODMAP diet or any type of other diet. But they've heard good things, so they're going to tell you to do it, right? You know, and yeah, I've heard other things. A really cringy thing I saw on TikTok actually was, I don't know who this person was, but they were advocating for yearly annual colonoscopies. Because apparently, according to this person, you hold a lot of toxins in your intestines, and and those toxins cause excess weight. So what you should do is get a yearly colonoscopy. And my first response or initial reaction to that was, this person has never had a colonoscopy.
Right?
This person, as someone who has had a colonoscopy, you could not pay me to get one yearly. Like,
Oh,
it, because the amount of work that goes into prepping for that, like, you're not getting it yearly unless you absolutely have to, or you are deep in the throes of an eating disorder,
sure.
essentially. I think those are really the only reasons you would want to do that regularly. So, just like things like that, it's a lot of, not understanding celiac and why we're gaining weight. And yeah, I mean, I've been kicked out of many support groups for calling this out, and I get blocked a lot on social media.
She's a
Uh,
defender. She's a true Wonder
I
Woman.
get in a lot of trouble, I guess. Yeah.
I
So,
like it.
but in thinking about our own experiences with diet culture, I mean, when was the first time you ever kind of thought, oh, okay, this is a diet, and
Hmm.
um, if I do this diet, I will be skinny? Or,
Yeah.
when did you kind of become aware, not even that it was like diet culture, but like just
Yeah.
aware that it was going on?
Yeah. Really, really young. And it's almost sad when I think back on it. But first, I'll start off with my parents were big dieters in terms of like trying out fad diets. Atkins was a big one. I mentioned
Oh my
already.
God. Yes.
I know, still going. I mentioned
Yes.
Nutrisystem. I mentioned OptiFast. My mom, I remember LA Weight Loss, Weight Watchers. I mean,
Uh-huh.
Slim Fast. Literally, the list goes on. So it was constant. It was constantly a part of my life. At any given moment, one or both of my parents was on a diet. My dad has done
Mm.
some pretty intense water fasts for like a month at a time. He's nuts. Love you, Dad. But
So, wait, to clarify, is a
yes.
water fast different than like detox or cleanse?
So I'll tell you what he was drinking, and you can tell. I don't know, actually. He was drinking water. There was some, I think, lemon involved, cayenne pepper, and maybe like apple cider vinegar or maple syrup or something like this.
Okay, that is the master cleanse.
Okay, he was a master cleanser then.
Yes, the master cleanse. It's just spicy water, essentially.
Yeah,
Yes, yes, yes. Okay,
poor man.
yes.
I mean, he was not a happy camper for those weeks, but you know
No.
what? He honestly, like, at a certain point, I felt like he got acclimated to it or used to it. And he, like, the first couple of days was really hard, I guess, is, what he said. He lost a lot of weight because it's all water weight that he was holding. And then it came back. I mean, that was the pattern with my parents. They would lose
Yeah.
weight and it would come back. Um, as with most of these fad diets, everyone's
Yep.
experience. But anyway, so it was always around. And I remember I have a younger sister, and I remember my, so one of my parents would get these magazines, and I think they still make them called, they're like the worst tabloids kind of, but they weren't really like celebrity tabloids. They would like have recipes and like a random advice in them about all sorts of stuff, including food and diet, losing weight, exercise, all of those things. And there was always, it was called Women's World. And there was
Mm.
always a 7-day like plan in every single copy or issue. There was always a plan. And it was like, eat, these options for breakfast, these options for lunch, these options for dinner for 7 days, and you'll lose, I lost 25 pounds in 7 days. And it was
Mhm.
like, seven of these almonds or like a pita bread or, whatever. It was very prescriptive. And I liked that. Like, I liked that it was outlined for me and I could follow
Mhm.
it to a T. Rules, again, rules. Um, and so that honestly, I mean, I could read at that point. So clearly it was, after I learned to read, I guess in kindergarten. But I remember the first time, you know, I knew about diets before then. I knew about diets when
Mhm.
it probably was, I don't know, 4 years old. Like, that
Wow.
sounds awful, but my parents were always like, the word diet too. It's two syllables. Like, it's fairly, it's diet. I don't know if the syllables are like that difficult, or the diction, whatever you call it, for young
Mhm.
kids to say. And I knew it was there. And from
Yeah.
that point on, like, it was what I aspired to do. Like, whenever I was never, I'll just say too, like, I was never happy with my body weight. I was never comfortable in my skin. All of this culminated in an eating disorder my senior year of high school. But through elementary school, middle school, high school, I went through bouts of like intense, restrictive, weird dieting or physical activity. You know, before we went on a cruise, I remember doing this like 17 magazine 2 week like bikini body thing, which had an accompanying like food plan with it. Oh yeah. So I've done like the full on gamut of awful things you can do.
Which,
And
like, isn't
uh
17 magazine like geared towards literal children?
it's like, yep. I was middle school. Middle school is when I was so like barely a preteen, early teen.
And
Like,
like your body is like ready to start puberty soon, like things are probably changing. So it's
yeah,
probably in a way the perfect storm,
it
right?
was absolutely, yes, it was awful. And I think that, I mean, that's a whole nother ball game of like what's problematic and the type of messages we're putting out there for the younger generations to consume. But this was like early 2000s. We were all very oriented toward diets, and diet culture became a true, like, it really stuck its talons in and like held ground there and then flourished. And now it's coming out in new and different and interesting ways. But yeah, that was it. That is like so sad. I hope my children, I want better for them, honestly. Like, I'm like, that is like not okay with me. I'm sure my sister was even younger because she was,
Mm.
again, younger than me. So she has a whole lot of opinions on these topics as well. And we talk about them. But what about you? Did you have anything similar, or were you a little bit older? What do you feel?
No, I very clearly remember. I don't know if both my parents were on diets, but my mom in and out of diets, right?
Mm,
The one that really comes to mind is doing Weight Watchers. So, she joined Weight Watchers, and it was at that point, it was the point system, but I guess
uh-huh.
or an earlier model of Weight Watchers was not. So at this point, it was the points model. You could eat certain foods, not eat certain foods. And that would kind of fluctuate. My mom made it clear in looking back in my childhood, my mom made it very clear that she was unhappy in her own body.
Hmm.
A lot of mention of, well, when I got married, I was 110 pounds.
Mm,
And I'm like, yes, but you're 5'1". Like, and before you had 3 children, like, and I remember, I don't exactly remember how old I was, but maybe like 9 or 10. And I remember this very clear moment of,
mm.
she's running around, she's late to go somewhere. And she goes, I look terrible and I hate myself. And my childhood brain connected those two things and was like, oh, she hates herself because she looks terrible. Right. So, oh, okay. If you quote unquote look terrible, that means that you should probably hate yourself.
Mm.
Um, there was a lot of focus on what my body looked like. Luckily it was not to the point where she was like, hey, you need to join Weight Watchers, which I know is a reality for a lot of people growing up. They were forced to be in these types of programs as children. But my mom had more comments to say about my body. Like, oh, you're getting love handles. And I'm like, growing up, I was very thin. Partially because I had an autoimmune disorder that I didn't know about,
Yeah.
that we didn't know about at the time. And genetic and all this other stuff that we've talked about. But I was pretty thin as a child, and I remember her comments really changing the way I saw myself. I no longer saw myself as a skinny kid.
Mm.
As I entered into puberty, I'm like, I didn't really fill out in any way. My body kind of stayed the same throughout childhood. But in my mind, it was different, right?
Yeah.
And it still happens today. She texted me like a month ago, and it was a picture of a gym um, membership, and she's like, gotta lose that pandemic weight.
Mm.
Obviously now as an adult, I'm more I feel more capable to be like, actually, it doesn't really matter if you gained weight during a pandemic because almost literally everybody did.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, who cares? And so things like that. And yeah, it was very toxic in that regard. But and there were moments where I very much had disordered eating. In high school, I would like, there was a period of time, I think I was like a junior in high school, where I would like not really eat much.
Mm-hmm.
Very much disordered eating, but not a full blown eating disorder at that point. But it was like, I eat one wheat, then I tally it. I eat another wheat, then I tally it. Like,
Yeah.
I count my calories, right? Um, and I think for me personally, it was more of a sense of control just because a lot of things were going on at that time. But I was also kind of predisposed to do that.
Yeah.
Counting calories was really the only way that I knew how to manage food, because we're told that that's the way you do it until you learn otherwise. So that's not actually it.
Yes.
But
Yes.
yeah, I think it's interesting what you've said is, it starts very young and it starts at home.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and realizing that your parents struggle with this thing. As kids, we don't understand that our parents are human,
I know. I know.
And so obviously as adults, we're like, oh, okay, well, that was really screwed up and they shouldn't have done that. And they have their own body image issues. But as a 4, 5, 6, even 13, 14, 15-year-old, it's not, you can't separate it, right? Like, you can't sit down and be like, okay, my mom feels this way about her body, and that is her own stuff. It doesn't have to affect me. It doesn't really work that way. So yeah, I think a lot of people probably have had similar experiences.
Yeah. And I think we are very lucky at this point that we are able to identify it, label or sort of name the toxic message when we hear it or see it, or think it. In some cases, it's, oh my gosh, whoa, that was an ed thought, eating disorder thought. Like, my goodness, that's sort of like post recovery, what folks with eating disorders who have had eating disorders will do is recognize that voice, that eating disorder voice. It's like, whoa, calm down on, the crackers. And it's like, oh my God, no, shut up. I'm hungry. So recognizing is a big first step. But I think you and I are very lucky in that we're able to separate rather than perpetuate those types of experiences and messages that we heard as kids and growing up, and the types of behaviors that we engaged in high school or middle school around restriction and around calorie counting. I agree. That's how my eating disorder started, was literally to a T measuring every single little tiny thing. I mean, calories in gum, like coffee,
wow, yeah.
tea, like it was that obsessively insane. So, and I think a lot of people are probably in similar boats. And when your life is spiraling out of control as a high schooler with all these things going on, and you're applying to colleges, and you're, maybe there's some comorbid like depression, anxiety, whatever's going on there. That's a way. Food intake and exercise, those are things you can control pretty easily in some cases.
Yeah.
And I think when everything else is seemingly out of your control. And so body changes too, like puberty, your boobs are growing, whatever it is, like it can be a really hard time. And that can be a way to co-opting your own food intake and your exercises as a way to exert some control.
Yeah. And, I agree. We are lucky that we are at the place that we are at now. But it's a consistent, you got to work at it regularly, right? Like, in the past year, I've had, I think, 2 different doctors tell me to do Weight Watchers based solely on either the number on the scale or my BMI, right? And so I feel very fortunate that I was at the place of like, well, that's not what I'm going to do. You're not looking at first of all, I have a dietitian, so thank you, but no thank you.
Yeah.
Two, you know, you're looking solely at the number on the scale or my BMI, and you're not taking into account literally anything else, right? And, you know, like I said, with the low FODMAP diet, odds are the physicians and the medical providers don't know anything about Weight Watchers or really any type of diet unless they are like definitely like clearly working on it and or working with it in some way. They're just like, yeah, do this. Just to, you know, join Weight Watchers.
Yeah.
That works.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, you know, it is a constant thing. And I think with social media, it can be difficult to navigate diet culture.
Yeah. And I'm very happy that you are able to take that information, because that, like a medical professional, someone with credentials or an MD after their last name telling you that 2 times in a year, like, dear God, like you are so strong. And I'm so glad that you were able to counter that negative, inaccurate, like, you don't know me messaging. And again, yeah, you work with a dietitian. I'm really glad like she is in your life, because like, what on earth are you saying? I feel like it's just like stick a label, like, you know, stick a quick treatment, quick fix to it. And that's kind of what, I mean, unfortunately, we're a very treatment focused rather than prevention focused society. So it's
Yeah. I also heard that, you know, medical providers that quote unquote counsel for weight loss get more money from the insurance company. So
Yikes.
For them to be like, oh, you said that you have experienced weight gain. Oh, do Weight Watchers. Or, oh, this is the type of diet you should do. That's a little bit more money in their pocket. So, you know, and we'll go into like the healthcare system and providers and things, but like, you know, they're human too, and they have their own biases, and fat phobia is definitely a thing in the medical field. I mean, as we talked about, so, you know, there's more to it than meets the eye with
absolutely.
Yeah. So, you know, I think next, you know, we should just kind of talk about how we have navigated diet culture.
Yeah. Let's do it.
You know, we've taken a lot of time to kind of practice the skill.
Yes.
And it takes practice, and it's, you know, not the easiest at first, but then it kind of becomes second nature. And, you know, you've already unfollowed all of these toxic people, so it's a little bit easier. You know, I think in talking about them, going back a little bit to the medical system, there are a couple of things that you can do. You know, you can tell the nurse or the doctor not to weigh you. Or if you feel uncomfortable doing that, you can just say, you can weigh me, but I do not want to know what the number is.
Right.
Because sometimes, like, I think just by habit, they will say the number out loud.
Sure.
But if you're like, yeah, you can weigh me, but I don't want to know the number, and you don't look, like,
yeah,
you know, that's an option.
You can get on the scale backwards too. I mean, that's something my dietitian used to do with me. And that's a great way. She never once told me my weight. We never talked about a number ever. So that's another way to do it if you're more comfortable, if you want them to weigh you, but you don't want to know what the weight is.
Yeah. And, you know, obviously, like, expanding upon that of like, it'll be in your chart probably if you go onto your like online portal. So you may see it there, but like trying to figure out a way to like skip over that section. Another thing is, you know, and this one we do have a caveat to, but call out those who comment on your body and other people's bodies. And also for yourself, stop commenting on your loved ones' bodies. I mean, it goes two ways, right? So understanding that this can be tricky, you know, there are a lot of power dynamics within different relationships. You know, even if you are at the doctor's office and they comment on your body, you may not feel comfortable being like, actually, I think that's inappropriate, right? That's totally fair. If you are just to be, you don't even have to say anything in that moment if you don't want to. You can then leave and decide that you don't want to see that doctor anymore. You can just,
Right.
in a sense, fire that doctor because they
Yep.
technically work for you. It is a little bit more tricky when you think about personal relationships. So, say it's a parent that is commenting on your body, a partner, a romantic partner, things like that. If you feel comfortable calling them out, then do so. I would recommend trying to use I statements like, I felt hurt when you said this about my body. I feel uncomfortable when you do this. That way they don't really have as much chance to get defensive. But this does take a lot of courage,
Yeah.
uh,
In practice.
and practice. Yeah. Um, you know, I am also a big advocate for, if you have a friend who just is toxic and sucks and comments on your body a lot, you don't have to be friends with them. Like, I am a big advocate for, like, that person brings nothing but toxicity to your life, and one of those ways that they do that is commenting on your body, and they don't want to respect your boundaries. Go ahead. You don't need them. Your life will
Mm-mm.
be better without them. So, um, also there is a growing evidence, it indicates that women's perceptions of and satisfaction with their bodies are influenced by their social networks and the way that women talk about or talk with others about their bodies. So if you're sitting in a group, this is a big thing about Weight Watchers, right? Is like, you're in a quote unquote support group
Yeah.
and you're just sitting around talking bad about your body and everyone else's body. Um, that's not good. That's not going to help
No.
your body image or navigating diet culture. Um, so, in any way that you can remove yourself, feel free to. I mean, you can even just kind of distance yourself, and you don't even have to have a confrontation if you don't want to. Just try to distance
Mm-hmm.
yourself from those types of people and those types of groups.
Right. And I think we realize people have different ways of different comfort levels when it comes to conflict and confrontation. And just know that if you're not, like me, if you're not the type of person who jumps headfirst into confrontation or calling someone out on the spot, there are so many other ways to get out of situations and to put a stop to whatever it is, whether it's negative comments about you, your body, others' bodies that you're hearing from one individual or group situations you're in. I mean, I totally support Grace in saying, like, you can just retract from that relationship. You don't need to be part of that friendship, whatever it is, or don't be part of the support group if you find that you're coming home and crying and judging yourself every single time you go to the group.
Mhm.
Or maybe just, the coffee clutch that the girls get together every Sunday and it's like all of you to just talk about the diets you're on. Maybe that's not the place for you. I don't know.
Mhm.
Just something to think about. Depends how you feel. Okay. Some other ways that we can navigate and confront diet culture in our lives is to be a little bit of a warrior, I would say. Like, watch out for subtle comments, and you can do this just within yourself as a practice. Um, try to be really intentional and mindful about what you say and how you say it. So, and we talked about this with the word restriction, right? But something that sounds kind of benign to you, and regardless of what you mean by it or your intention behind it, it may hit someone a lot harder than you want it to or than you think it will, because we don't know everyone's histories. We don't know their backgrounds and experiences when it comes to food and body image and maybe disordered eating behaviors. We know that these issues are incredibly pervasive. There's probably hardly anybody out there who has not had some experience with body dysmorphia or disordered eating or just self-worth, self-judgment, self-criticism issues. So let's just assume that we probably shouldn't say something that is, sort of on the fence, and just keep those thoughts like out of the air, and maybe also consider noticing when you want to say them and in what situations and why. Like, what do you mean by commenting on that person getting bread with their salad and the other person not getting bread with their salad? Like, that's just one example, but I think these types of things can come up very easily when we're in group eating situations, whether it's like at a party or at work. I mean, a lot of us are now lucky enough maybe to be working from home, and some of us aren't, but I remember like lunch meetings and stuff, that sort of
Mhm.
thing can be really difficult to navigate. So maybe just be a model and watch what you say, and maybe don't engage in comments around you know throwing shade at the donuts that are available at the meeting. I would also say that talking with somebody you trust, finding someone, whether that's a friend or your sibling or a family member or someone in your community, someone in your class that you find you have like a really great common like-minded idea about something when it comes to body image, body honesty, body acceptance. Talk to them, see if they're willing to dive into it a little bit more, because I think a lot of the time we crave that and we don't know we want it until we start to have these honest, down to earth conversations. And they can make a huge difference, because they provide social support. They let us know we're not in this alone and that we have a place to go to talk about this stuff. And talking it out, just external processing, that kind of thing can be really helpful when it comes um, to these sorts of very nuanced, very complex, societally pervasive issues. I personally talk a lot to my sister, friends who know my history. I mean, Grace and I have had a lot of conversations on this front, and so I think this kind of goes back to what Grace was saying about choosing. You can choose your friends, right? Like, surround yourself with like-minded, understanding people who feed you positivity and positive messages. And there's no need to surround yourself with people who throw out some really hurtful, degrading comments about you or others' bodies. It's just not, doesn't make you feel good. That you don't need to engage in that. Um, and so, I think I feel personally pretty comfortable when it comes to discussing these topics, because I feel like I had very strong values and opinions about, if that wasn't made clear already, about size, shape, body, eating, moving, living, in a way that serves our individual, unique needs, and provides joy to allow us to live lives of contentment and at peace and in as healthy a way as we possibly can, and to feel our best ultimately is what we're all after, I think. um, I would say, like, there are plenty of online resources, and we'll link some in our show notes, but again, be wary of them. I mean, not all of them,
Mhm.
as you learned, are super supportive. And again, these are people oftentimes in these support groups who don't have credentials, right? Like, they
Mhm.
may not have the education, and even if they do, that doesn't mean they have the golden ticket and that they're right, in every way. Sometimes it's not right for you, and that's fine. You do know your body best, and I think we need to probably believe that a little bit more, just as a whole, as a society. So if something rubs you the wrong way, if you go to any of these groups or meetings, maybe don't overthink it. Just trust your gut, and maybe that's a sign that it's not the group for you.
Mhm.
um, and lastly, I'll just say that going to talk therapy, again, this is a privilege. And if you are able to do this, I would highly support it, because it has been intensely helpful for me. Um, of course, therapy is dependent on often medical coverage, medical insurance. However, some therapists are sliding scale, so there may
Mhm.
be options for you to pay a price that is more reasonable or fits within your budget. So I would just totally support looking into those resources, or talking to friends who are going to therapists, and seeing if anybody has recommendations. And it takes time to find the right fit. So of course, maybe shopping around a little is something you'll need to do, but it's another thing I would definitely support.
Yeah, I think to tack onto that, you know, also understanding that not all therapists are great. There are
Hmm.
some that, may not have an anti-diet lens.
Yep.
So kind of look for that when you're shopping around for a therapist. Also, dietitians can be a great
Yeah.
resource. Um, if you are looking for a dietitian, check out their website and see if under, the conditions that they help with, if they mention weight loss or BMI, anything.
Hmm.
Read their reviews and see what people say. If they say, oh, they helped me drop, my BMI dropped, that is a sign that maybe they're not on the same page as you, if they're not as anti-diet as you, right? Or that you need. There is an organization called Association for Size Diversity and Health, and they promote the health at every size model, which is basically an anti-diet culture model, that size does not equal health. So if you're looking for a provider, I would look at that organization and see, if there are providers that follow that model. Just would make your life a lot more easier. So, we talked a lot about social media too. So a big thing with social media is, if you're a big social media person, start following people with various body types. This was a big thing for me. I started following people that were various shapes and sizes. And I found myself slowly following more of the anti-diet social media accounts, and following less and less of the usual social media influencers, exercise people that were like consistently exercising, things like that. Follow influencers that make you feel good and supported, and make you feel like, oh, this person's experiencing the same thing I'm experiencing. Understanding that there is a degree of separation there, but if you're seeing them talk about what it's like to navigate in their type of body, or them living their life very happy in a different size body than you, that kind of helps with some acceptance in that regard. Also the impact and power of the messages, both positive and negative, that subconsciously wash over us as we scroll through, should not be underestimated. As we mentioned earlier, we would scroll through things and we would see things, and we didn't even realize that they were diet culture messages, right? Until we one day noticed, we were like, oh my God, we've been getting all of these messages subconsciously. So just be really intentional about the media that you consume, and be very critical of the media that you consume as well. Social media can be a great tool, but just be very critical of who you follow, what they promote, and things like that. And if you're finding that social media in general just isn't really working for you, consider limiting it. It can be very overwhelming. There's a lot of messages out there. And if you're just like, I don't even know where to start, maybe take a day or two out of the week that you're like, no social media. We're not going to do that today. So, just kind of prioritize and tune into your own feelings and your own body when it comes to social media. And also, be skeptical, ask questions, do some research, ask other people. As we said, not everyone on social media is an expert.
Yeah.
They don't always know what they're talking about. So do your own research, and try to see what you find. Speaking of the research, there is a lot of articles talking about combating diet culture. And a pretty common thread or theme is intuitive eating as a way to combat diet culture. It's considered an alternative approach that involves developing a connection with one's own internal cues of hunger, fullness, and satisfaction, and using those cues to guide food and exercise choices. You prioritize your own internal cues, and that's the foundation of intuitive eating. And there are 10 principles to intuitive eating, such as rejecting the diet mentality or diet culture, make peace with food, honor your feelings without using food, respect your body, and honor your health. It also, this intuitive eating recognizes that individuals experience unique needs around food. It argues that people connected with their internal hunger cues will naturally make food and exercise choices that promote health. And importantly, an intuitive eating approach argues that when people are able to release diet culture beliefs, they become free to make choices according to their own body's needs, ultimately resulting in health improvements and more peaceful relationships with their bodies.
Yeah. Intuitive eating, not intuitive fasting.
No, different things.
Quite different. And again, there are some resources and good literature articles that we'll link to for some of that intuitive eating information that we just shared. But I think a big piece of this is we're coming in for a landing here. This is hard. That like this stuff is really difficult. I think Grace and I think a lot about these things regularly, so it's very easy for us to kind of be very almost aggressive with like how much we believe, in our own opinions and values, and I think that it's important to have some grace with yourself and take it easy. And maybe the first step, you don't have to do all of these things at once, but maybe the first step is recognizing, where am I seeing diet culture in my life? Like, it doesn't have to just be media or social media. It can be on the cereal box, it could be on the billboard, it could be like the way that we, you know whatever, the way that we shop. I mean, just the way that stores are set up in aisles, like maybe consider those not even media related, subtle ways that diet culture is infiltrating our daily lives. Um, and let's also just note that like there's a ton of complexity to all of the issues that we discussed here today. And I think all of them beg deeper investigation and exploration. Some of them we'll get into in other episodes, but of course, we'd love to hear from you regarding what is most interesting to you and what you want to hear more of, or if you completely disagreed or very adamantly agreed with something that we talked about in this episode or said. And I will, because we talked a lot about eating disorders today, I will say that one great resource, and we'll link this in our show notes, for people who may be struggling with food, eating, body neutrality, and or if you think you may have an eating disorder or may have someone in your life who might have an eating disorder, I would definitely refer you to the NEDA, which is the National Eating Disorder Association website. They have an online, totally anonymous screening tool, quick screening tool, and they have a ton of resources that might be really helpful. So they are a great support. They exist for a reason, and I would really support you visiting them if you believe you have a reason to. And then there are several other resources. We'll link them in our notes, and we'll talk about them a little deeper when we go into our eating disorder, maybe BMI episode. We haven't completely fleshed it out yet, but yeah, as I said, please let us know if anything we talked about today rang particularly true to you, or if you have anything you'd like to share about your own experiences with diet culture, or anything related to diet and body image and size that we talked about in this episode. Please let us know. Write to us at theflowup@gmail.com. We would really, really love to hear from you. And please don't forget to send in questions about anything related to what we talked about today, or any of our other sort of flow up podcast topics, whether it's menstruation related, contraception related, being an advocate for yourself in the healthcare system. Related questions, please send those again to theflowup@gmail.com, and we cannot wait to read them and answer them on the next episode.
Yeah. And also, don't forget to follow us on Spotify or wherever you get your podcasts. We're on Instagram at the Flow Up Podcast, also on Twitter at Flow Up Podcast. And we are still working on getting our Patreon kicked off, but you all will be the first to know when it goes live. So stay tuned for more information.
Thanks so much for listening, everybody.